right, we are jumping into Business Broken to Smokin podcast, and this is 046. We picked this song by the Talking Heads because often you ask yourself now, how did I get here? Like, how did I end up like this? And this is a great topic today. We're going to be talking to David Quick, a well-known, well-established culture index coach, practitioner, also a fellow Pinnacle guide, business coach, also Vistage chairperson, right? Is that the way you said it? So we're excited to get talking with you. We have some great cigars we're smoking today.
Yeah.
We've got some great 4-Gate bourbon that you brought from Indiana, so we're excited to dig into that. So
glad to be here.
Dave, it's great to having you with us. We're really excited. We've been waiting for this for a while, so we're jazzed to have you here, buddy. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you, how in the world did you get into this whole coaching world? Like, what was that pathway like for you?
So it probably starts with early life that in middle school, I started helping others play saxophone, believe it or not, and kind of a natural draw to coaching. Sports all my life, coached Little League, youth football, basketball, and eventually in the Navy and wanted to be a teacher coach was hey, once I retire from the Navy, that's what I'll do. But path took me other places, 3-time CEO. After my last CEO stint, I said, all right, well, I wanted to do this so bad, and now that I've done it 3 times, I don't know what I was chasing, but it wasn't that. Successful, enjoyed the work, loved building things, but said, I don't know what's next, but it's not that. That led to Vistage chairing and some executive coaching there. And from that point, I've kind of focused on individual group coaching, culture development, and a lot of tools, a lot of learning along the way. Vistage says everything you've done in the first 5 years, you realize at some point was malpractice. And that's held true almost in everything that I've found my way to, is that we get better as we practice, we get better as we do, we get better as we learn. So, but there was early roots of that, teaching saxophone as a junior high saxophone player for younger saxophone players.
What was it alto, tenor?
Alto primarily. Marching band played tenor a couple times, but alto was my thing.
That's great.
And it's one of the things my mom forced me to do. As I graduated from high school and even had music scholarships, said, yeah, I'm done with saxophone and haven't played it since I've graduated from high school. But pretty accomplished, and that was because my mom forced that, music lessons. I had a music teacher that would, about halfway through the lesson, say, call your mom, tell her to come get you. You're wasting my time. So early lessons in accountability.
That is super intense.
Yeah, it was, You
were in junior high?
High school then, but yeah, that was Division I music kind of contest and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Wow.
Fond or not so fond memories. Sure. Anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
How'd you get from that to the Navy? I mean, how'd you go?
Yeah, that's a crazy story too. So my dad was in the Air Force and grew up kind of on Air Force bases, moved back to Indiana. And my parents very wisely at some point when I was considering school said, hey, what about the service academies? And I remember going, what's that? I had no idea what that even meant. And they very wisely, instead of pushing, said, hey, on our summer vacation this year, let's go look at a couple of them. So went to Canada in my grandmother's station wagon, and my 2 brothers and I in the back seat all through Canada, and then came down the East Coast and saw West Point, the Coast Guard Academy in Annapolis, and kind of instantly loved Annapolis, just beautiful campus, all those things. So I was like, sure. And my understanding was this is Army Navy, and kind of understood that's what that was in terms of the annual football game. And learned some more and kind of went back my junior year to look at it and went through the whole nomination appointment process and the end, I said I can always quit. So wasn't convinced that was right for me, but was a fundamental part of kind of who I am and all those things. So,
What'd you do in the Navy?
surface warfare. So drove ships, Desert Storm. So I was in the middle of the Suez Canal on Bush's ultimatum, and you do something called change the comm guard when you're in the Suez Canal. So you copy both the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. And all of a sudden the teletype started going crazy. Delivered to the postman eyes only, Tomahawk launch coordinate. And there were hundreds of those on Bush's ultimatum or the following morning, and said, guess we're going to war. So I was in the Red Sea for the first 6 months of Desert Storm.
And was it 90 what, 91 or 2?
91, I think, yeah.
Wow. And what was your role?
Lieutenant at the time, so surface warfare, drove the ship, officer of the watch, they call it, drive the ship, keep us safe, keep us all alive, all those things.
What's that book? It's Your Ship.
Perfect book.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I love that ship. I have a couple clients that I love that ship. I love that boat. I love the book. I love that vessel.
Are you trying to get to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to mine.
You need it.
This is a great conversation
guys.
already, man. I really appreciate you being here.
Cheers.
So, a couple clients I've given that book to, and it's been life-changing for them. You know, as far as how to get involved in talking with all the boots-on-the-ground folks, getting them to weigh in, kind of showing them what it looks like when somebody that's very, I don't know, senior kind of takes everybody and says, hey, let's put our heads together and talk about this thing. And it's a great practical example of how to go around. I loved how he interviewed every single member before, just in his first week or two or so, as the, what it would be, the captain?
Correct.
Is that right?
Captain.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that was great. I loved it. Now, I think that was, when did he write that? 2000 or something like that? It's been
a while.
20 years or so.
Yeah, it's been a while. Very good book.
What's his name? I can't remember.
It's like
Shane-
Armoff or something like that.
Yeah, it starts with an A.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get it in a minute. Yeah. He has another book out that I've heard is good. I have it, but I haven't read it yet. So that's interesting. How long were you in the Navy?
8 years active duty, a couple years in reserve, which was a requirement. The Navy was asking for people to leave and actually paying them to leave. They just paid for my master's degree in education so I could one day teach and coach. And I raised my hand and said, how about me? And they said, sure. And all sounds great. It's probably one of the points in my life where I was most fearful. I remember sitting on a couch in Annapolis, like kind of crying, going, what the hell am I doing? Because it'd been everything I known to that point. And I, of all things, was going to go sell laboratory equipment, which I knew nothing about, hadn't really sold anything in my life, and was like, I'm, top of my career.
What, 28 or something? 30?
Yeah, 28 years old, probably 28, 29. Yeah. Going, hey, this is what I've known pretty much my whole adult life. I've done remarkably well, climbed, that military ladder. And the real reason for leaving was family separation, but also that you kind of have this time and rank that you're going to be this rank for a certain period of time, no matter how well you perform. And, that led to, where can I find a job that doesn't have that? And probably my early real opportunity was with Cintas. They were hiring a bunch of junior military officers. It was a steam plant. I was an engineering officer of the watch, so it was kind of the same thing. And I had the aha that this is kind of the same thing, where I interviewed, went up to a plant outside of Detroit and started asking questions like, well, when should I expect to be promoted? And they're like, well, when the plant manager dies. And I said, yeah, this is not.
And how old is he?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Yeah. And so I did. This might not be what I want. So that led to a bunch of conversations, and we'll talk about mentors, I'm sure, but reached out to a bunch of people that had left and had success and said, hey, what should I do? And almost every one of them said, sell now. Go figure out how to do that early in your career. You won't want to go back to that once you have success. And that turned out to be fantastic advice, and did that early in my career as I left the Navy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so you went from that to CEO of some sort. So what was that?
Yeah, long climb. I say long. As soon as I left the Navy, I said, hey, I want to be a CEO by the time I'm 40. Left my last CEO stint at 42. So quickly climbed corporate ladder, was promoted within the first 6 months. The job I took was not a usual job for new hire. A gentleman named Bill Daniel, I still remember, interviewed with him in Annapolis. There was a snowstorm. I had an interview scheduled through a recruiter, knocked on his door, and he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I have an interview. He said, did no one call you to cancel? I said, no, I have an interview. I'm here. And ended up hiring me. The job was account executive that I interviewed for, and that's over 1,000 accounts. I just said, not doing that. That's not going to serve me well. Took a job called key account executive that had 60 accounts in Indiana, Ohio, where we sit. So I covered this territory early and found my way to success, again, through other help. One of my early ahas is I know nothing about this. So I went to a lab director, Carol McRae, in Cincinnati at a Jewish hospital, and pretty quickly said, hey, I know nothing about laboratory. I know nothing about selling. Just left the Navy and help. And she put her arm around me and said, I'll teach you everything you need to know. So She did.
So you started CEOing. How did that, talk about that, going from that to Vistage? How did you get interested in Vistage? And talk about Vistage for a sec for folks who don't have any idea what that is, which is surprisingly many.
Yeah, so left my last CEO stint in Avon, Connecticut, which lived in Avon, worked in Torrington, and said, hey, what's next? Moved back to Indiana, said, we're going to raise two of my youngest sons. I have 4 sons. The 2 youngest were still at age where they needed mom and dad. We moved back to Indiana and lived with my parents for a short period and said, hey, what's next? And was looking for all kinds of things, was doing some consulting in kind of the medical space that I had left and having some early success there, but it felt kind of the same. So I'm like, hey, this is not what I want to do. And I can't remember, honestly, whether Vistage found me or I found them, applied to an opening, don't know. But met with a fantastic lady, Jean Lauterbach, who was at the time best practice chair in Cincinnati. We met at a German restaurant in Batesville, Indiana, and she just kind of explained what Vistage was. I was super intrigued. And, Vistage is a CEO or business owner peer-to-peer advisory group. So groups of men and women that own businesses, run businesses, are the leaders of their business, get together every month and help each other, serve as an advisory board. And Vistage frames itself on what they call carefrontation. So how do we demonstrate that we care, and how do we confront? So very similar to the concept in Radical Candor or others, where we're going to push and say, hey, because I care, I'm going to push you hard. And so explored that with her. They have a whole process to train you. The training was fantastic. You head out to San Diego for a couple weeks, and they teach you to launch your group, which is probably one of the hardest things I've done, actually. You're selling something that's really hard to explain, that we're going to get in a room together, and I'm going to facilitate this, and we're going to be rosy, and, hey, will you pay me $1,300 to $1,500 a month to do that? And most CEOs look at you like, what are you talking about? So in their wisdom, they help you through that process. We go deep into feedback and some things later, topics, but really good at that whole process of preparing you. But I think in my new chair group, there were 65, 66 people that started, and I think 6 or 7 launched a group. So it's it's not
it's pretty tough.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing, and not that there's any rocket science. I think it's just you're selling you first and foremost. So much like our business coaching, it's how do I demonstrate that this will have value for a business owner, CEO, and the real power is the group. So it's a meaningful. And masterminds, peer advisor groups have been around forever. We can go all the way back to Aristotle and others, Ben Franklin and his, what did he call his leather apron group, where it was, hey, what book have you read? What did you learn? And that was kind of the best thinking at the time. Ben Franklin had that group, and there's a bunch written about it. But Vistage, I think, launched in the 50s, and they're now 20,000 CEO members across the world. I think they're in 25 countries or something now.
have never heard of the leather apron Ben Franklin thing.
Junto. I just thought what it was called. He called it Junto, or the leather apron. And there's a couple articles you can find, and I forget what they call it, but it's like, here's why we get together. And it was like to share the news of the community, learn from each other. And it's written in the language of the time. So it's an interesting read just on the kind of, their charter is probably what it was.
And wasn't he a Philadelphia guy?
So it was kind of the society and minds in Philly at the time.
That's interesting. We'll have to dive into that. That sounds really, really cool. I've been looking for some new stuff to read lately. I've just finished a Thomas Sowell book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Really interesting. I thought it was recent, and it's from 2005.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I was shocked by that. Really, really scholarly discussion about the history of slavery, history of racism, history of he's an economist, and so he comes at it from economic viewpoint. It's very, very well written, tons and tons of data, tons and tons of whatever. Anyway, just finished that and started reading Think Again, Adam Grant, and still in the middle of Worldly Philosophers. What's his name? Starts with an H.
Yeah, that's taken a while.
Heilbrunner or something like that.
I just started Obsessions of a Pricing Man and started listening to it on tape.
I've
Audible.
heard of that. Yeah, who is that? Somebody's mentioning it.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, and it's funny. Greg Cleary, our leader, brought it up today in our process. But I don't think it's an Audible book, is my sense right now. I think it's one where there's some formulas and what's ideal pricing, how do you anchor. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I think is probably more highlighter, pen and paper, not the I'm trying to figure this out as I drive down the road. But I did listen to the first two chapters on my way here today. So
this Adam Grant one is I would not read it. I have it on the shelf, but I would not read it if it wasn't audio. It's kind of, it's got some good stuff, but it's just, he reads it and he's kind of annoying me. I don't know.
Can you make it go faster?
yeah,
I should.
Like,
I never do that. I just, it seems immoral to me to make it go fast. I don't know why.
I was at 1.3 today, so
Oh, man.
There you go.
All right.
Mine
That's a great call.
Nice.
You get a little chipmunky above that, but
Yeah.
1.3 is still kind of the narrator's tone, just a little faster.
Yeah. Good call on these smokes, by the way.
Oh, good.
What is this thing? I can't remember the name of it.
Placencia.
All I know is that they had a big selection, and I was like, that looks really good.
Yeah. Alma is the
Yeah.
Alma Fuente.
Yeah.
Well, so when were you Vistage? When did you start doing that? Like how long ago?
Probably 9+ years ago. So I think I launched my group 9 years. I still have founding members in Bloomington, Indiana. The group's grown. It's a diverse group of people. I think at one point we had a 22-year-old and a 72-year-old.
Wow.
I got staunch Republicans, super liberal Dems. I could tell all kinds of stories, but love the diversity of thinking. That's the power of that group, that you'll get the most liberal, hippie, child of the 60s next to a guy who makes concealed carry holsters, looking at each other like, why are we sitting here together? And they end up helping each other in their business. So
That's great.
It's been really
That's
good.
great.
Yeah.
This Think Again book, he's challenging folks to reformulate. And he's a Wharton. He went to Harvard, and he's a Wharton guy now. Wharton professor, psychologist. Kind of reminds me of Angela Duckworth a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting.
Grit.
Her angle, yeah.
Okay.
Well, so I want to dig deep into Culture Index. I almost said Culture Code. Culture Index. Have you read Culture Code, by the way?
I don't know.
Great book.
Yeah, I don't know.
By Daniel Coyle.
What's the gist?
He goes around and studies might be a little strong, but looks into 7 or 8 really high-performing cultures. One of them is SEAL Team 6.
I have read it, yeah.
And IDEO, a couple of comedy troupe, Danny Meyer, restaurant guy. It's really fascinating. And it's...
What drives culture.
Yep. And it's, I got a lot out of it just from really almost anecdotal. Just like, oh, that's what it looks like. Or that's how you do it. It's kind of practical, kind of observational. So he's a Cleveland guy, apparently.
Yeah.
And
Kimberly
Dyer knows him.
Yeah.
So we're like, hey, I guess he's her neighbor or something.
Oh, wow.
So we're working that angle, see if we can get him in here.
Absolutely.
But so we want to talk about Culture Index. I'm fascinated with any assessment that can help the entrepreneur client of ours do a better job putting the right people in the right seats, do a better job interviewing. I find, a scale of 1 to 10, entrepreneurs interviewing are at like a 1 or a 2, maybe 2.5. They're just stinking bad at it, generally speaking. I haven't found many that are good. If they are good, they're at like a 5 or 6. They stand out. But so these assessments are very practical. And I have a couple clients that use Culture Index. I have a couple clients that use other things like Colby, the Pat Lencioni modality, was it Working Genius? Yeah, and
Strength Finders.
StrengthsFinder, I'm familiar with that one, a little bit with Predictive. But I want to get, first of all, maybe paint a broader picture of how Culture Index kind of fits in the assessment world.
Sure. So I'll talk about it from primarily my view of it as a long-term client. So I started using the tool about 19 years ago, was one of the early Culture Index adopters. And I'll frame it this way so people understand it. So I took a call from a gentleman named Jeff Ward that was calling to cold call. We were growing my home delivery company from, at the time, I think we had 4 sales reps. I think by the time he called me, we were 25, and we had decided that was the path to scaling. So much like the entrepreneurs listening to this, it was like, hey, how do we scale our business? What do we need to do? And we had kind of through trial and error tried to hire sales reps for the last handful of years. And we had purchased a company that had 25-ish reps that were all pretty good, but we knew we needed to add 50. And so we had ads plastered across most major metros where people with diabetes are, which is where the population is. And Jeff Ward called me at a Thursday morning at about 7 a.m. and said, hey, I'm that guy that has to make cold calls to grow my business. Can I get 5 minutes? So as a longtime sales professional, marketing professional, I was like, sure, I'll take this call. And he said, instead of talking about what I do, I see that you're hiring 50 reps or so in markets all across the country. If I could eliminate one bad hire, would you be interested? I said, sure. He goes, well, great. So again, instead of talking about it, I'm going to send you this tool. I want you to send it to 5 of your best, 5 of your worst, and I'll tell you who's who. And I remember at the moment, like, game on, dude, let's go. Mm-hmm. And so, classic, how do I challenge a highly autonomous, driven entrepreneur? And that was perfect. And he did a remarkable job. He went through the 10 people and nailed almost all of them, if not all of them. It's a long time ago now, but what I remember clearly is I said, hey, Jeff, I got to run to a meeting. You look at these 10. If I had to hire one, which one and why? And he answered it in a remarkable way. He goes, well, that's easy. And I'm like, okay. And what's amazing is he named our Rep of the Year for the last 2 years, Rep of the Year at 2 other companies, and said, hey, we call this profile and profile patterns, because there's multiple patterns, triple crown winner. So we look and say, what's the ideal for this type of role? And he says, hey, for what you do, it's called persuader. She's a persuader. Her bottom graph is also a persuader. So when we ask her what she thinks she needs to do to be successful, she essentially says, just wake up and be me. So from that point, I was like pretty intrigued. How do I figure this out? Because this was, we're getting ready to hire 50 people. And so the rest they say is history. But what Culture Index does really well, and I think entrepreneurs, the thing you alluded to earlier, is we seek data, we seek information, and we look for something to help us make decisions. And in most hiring, that's our gut. If it's not our gut, it's 6 people's guts that we sit in a conference room and go, hey, Mark, what do you think? Hey, Shane, what do you think? And we go around and go, I like Betty better. And the other person says, I like Bill better. And everything after that is subjective. And so it adds data and objectivity to the hiring process. And if you do that really well, I tell folks all the time that that's about 10% of the value culture index, that 90% is how do I motivate, give feedback, inspire people. And most of us understand golden rule, talk about that it allows you to live platinum rule. I can treat people the way they want to be treated. I can motivate them in the way that they want to be motivated. And, the real part in hiring is I just eliminate bad hires. This is Moneyball for hiring. It says, hey, statistically, this person will succeed at this level based on percent match to ideal, because we can determine the ideal pattern for any job in any company. And it truly is that. It's not, what is a sales rep? It's what is a sales rep at this company. So it just adds that layer of objectivity, of data. How do I ask questions in an interview? How do I follow up? How do I reference check? I mean, the list goes on how you can use this data. So it's much like entrepreneurs trying to make decisions on financials without financials. And that's how most hire. Yeah. And so here you now have a set of financials that you
That's how they do financials too.
Yeah, many. And I think that's, if we talk about the classic challenge of entrepreneurs, it's that, which is, hey, let's press forward. And, I used to tell my organizations all the time that you'll get certainty even in the absence of it. So, we're paid to have the answer. We're paid to press forward. Mm-hmm. Even when we don't have it, we press forward. So
that's great. I've seen it practically with a few clients as far as in their hiring process and in their managing process too. Helps them to get organized around the role. And this one particular client, they put their CI, that little graph, that little the kind of the 4 dots and the lines connecting them on their accountability chart. I think they put it on their email.
I've seen it all. I have people that have it on coffee cups, that have it on their cubicles, have it at the entrance of their desk. And you see that with others as well. So you'll see that with Working Genius. You'll see that with Predictive Index. You'll see that with other profile types. That it helps us understand who we're encountering and how do we act and behave, how do we motivate, how do we understand that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. So talk about the what exactly it's measuring.
So measures 7 key work-related traits. You've alluded to the first 4 are measured against the norm of all people. And those are autonomy, social ability, patience, and conformity. And essentially we're saying, do you have more or less than the norm of those traits, and how much more or less of those traits do you have? And what's remarkably powerful then is that we can go, well, what's required for this job? And the proverbial square peg, square hole, round peg, round hole, we can determine, we can ask questions, we can dive right into the heart of the matter in interviews on, hey, this is what this little tool says, and it's statistically strong. Most of our parameters fall between 0.88 and 0.94 for any high data compliant conforming people that want to know more information than will be on this podcast. But you can measure all that statistically and then predictively ask questions and look at match against ideal types of roles in any organization.
So autonomy, sociability, patience?
Patience and conformity.
Conformity.
Those are the 4 measured against the norm. And then we also measure logic, ingenuity, and something called energy units.
Energy units? Well, didn't we hear about that with ERGs? Right?
Yeah, a little different than that, but yes.
Okay. All right. Logic, energy units. What was the third one? The second one, I guess? Logic. Ingenuity. Okay. Ingenuity. Hosting and writing notes at the same time. Energy units is probably not that great of an idea, but I'm doing it anyway. So I've seen all the little graphs. So you take the test and out comes this quadrant. It's not a quadrant. Is it?
Curve shape. So, if you take the assessment, it instantly scores you against the norm of all people for those first four traits. And let's say typified pattern or a pattern. We have 19 different patterns. And, in a broad way, what you're doing is taking over 655,000 different combinations of data and putting them in 19 patterns, 4 groups. Those 4 groups are visionary, technical research, social, and organizational. And then the 19 patterns range from things like daredevil to traditionalist. And, most of the names indicate what the foundational personality is here. And, if we look at daredevil, that's a classic entrepreneurial, all gas, no brake, high autonomy, low conformity, sees the future, very influential, can get people to follow them, but are train wrecks on process and details and follow-up and everything that we think of as entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I like to think about daredevils as, and I can't remember who said this, but they're both the arsonist and the fire brigade at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds right.
Yeah, so that's kind of that classic daredevil. And then traditionalist is, think quintessential good soldier. What will I do? What you tell me to do? What will I do? What you've trained me to do? How will I do it? Remarkably the same over and over again. And, there's jobs in our organizations that need that. Most entrepreneurs couldn't do that work. So it's how do we help them understand what they need and find those people for specific roles.
So explain the dots, that the way that, because I know closer to the center means something and further away means something. So there's some sort of, explain like the graph or the layout of the dots, first of all.
Yeah, so the first thing the tool does is establishes your norm. So it says, hey, against the norm of all people, this is where your norm line is, and it is the statistical norm. And then we measure distance and direction from the norm for those first 4 traits. So as an example, autonomy, if you're right of the norm, you have more autonomy than the norm, more self-directed, proactive, assertive. And that ranges from, we'll use the word confident, to a word arrogant a-hole. And so as you get more distance from the norm, the intensity, abnormality, the extremeness of that trait shows up. And so if you're more near the norm, that's a more malleable, flexible trait for the individual. As you're more extreme, statistically less normal or abnormal, and means harder for you to modify.
Okay.
So, if you have someone that's distanced from the norm and it's just Six Sigma quality data or the essential Six Sigma statistical data, so those that are Six Sigma trained will understand that we're just looking at those Six Sigma from a personality standpoint instead of process. And we're able to say, well, how far from the norm is this trait? And as you get further from the norm, more extreme, both right and left of norm. So right would be more of that than the norm, and left would be less of that than the norm. So for autonomy, which is this confident, self-directed, you're going to range from arrogant a-hole to meek doormat. And almost everyone else statistically is between those two things.
Okay. So the arrogant is off on one side of the chart and the meek is off on the other side.
Correct. And so you have this spectrum where in the middle is the norm of all people.
Yeah, so if they're lined up, the dots are kind of lined up, stacked up on top of each other.
That means they're going to be a flexible, adaptable person across those traits.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we're aiming this podcast at kind of really the entrepreneur. That's such a broad word, but visionary leader, second in command leader, the kind of managerial or the go get it done executing leader, the business owner, operator, or perhaps an advisor to those folks.
Yeah.
So if that being the case, talk about practically how to take the test. Like how do you, or this assessment, I guess not a test, but you know what I'm saying. So how do you, what does it look like for, let's say, a business of 50 employees? Like, this sounds great. What would be a next step for them?
So almost every advisor in Culture Index will set up a demo, and the demo is a no cost, try the tool, 30 days, 60 days. And you're able to assess your team, get face validity of the tool, understand it. But what you get back is the statistical data on anyone that completes it. Takes less than 10 minutes to complete, strong statistically, predictive of behavior, and look at the dynamics of the team and understand where plus, minus, strength, weakness, discord, friction, where people will work together well. I mean, all that's understood pretty quickly by advisors that understand the tool. Again, as my customer experience, my advisor was priceless. Couldn't have helped me more understand people. I mean, I could tell story after story. There were, we would buy companies and I'd struggle with a profile saying, hey, how come this guy can't perform? And he would go, I call that pattern a product of spoilage, meaning they've been given everything their whole life and will struggle to do anything for you. And that's what we were seeing. And so very insightful. And it just becomes years of experience understanding the tool. Clients that take on the tool and understand it will get that experience just by using it and start to understand what these patterns mean, what a dot position means, how to interpret that in hiring, how to think about that in giving feedback and coaching. And it just, again, provides objective data for you to make decisions around.
So then how do they, so they take the test and assessment. Now they have, let's say, a handful with their maybe leadership team. Is that a pretty common pathway to start with?
Yeah, most demos we say, hey, do the leadership team and 5 to 8 top performers, 5 to 8 that are struggling with the work assigned. And, we'll either identify those proactively without identification or walk the business owner and leadership team through that. And then, if it's something that you look and go, hey, we think this tool will help hire, inspire, motivate, give feedback, then they can acquire the tool, sign an agreement, press forward. It's based on unlimited use of the tool, annual subscription, based on total number of employees, and then the number of people that go through a 1.5-day workshop to get you up to speed on the tool. Okay.
So you come in, or the advisor will come in and kind of train them up on it?
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things about a lot of these assessments is you're kind of like flying by the seat of your pants a little bit. And there's a lot of value to them, but they need somebody to really kind of hold their hand and walk through it, right?
Yeah, so I and others, and Jeff was this for me, unlimited access, call me when you need help. So probably much like you treat your clients. So clearly there to help them understand the tool. I joke all the time and say, hey, your first encounter with Culture Index is kind of preschool. The 1.5-day workshop's kindergarten, and if you want a PhD, you can get that in the next year by just learning, applying the tool, asking questions when they come up. And again, just like anything, spend the time and energy to understand it. So my clients, we work hard on how do you embed this tool in all of those things, hiring, coaching, succession planning, how do you motivate lead. So anyone that is responsible for payroll, hire, coach, fire, should, if you bring on one of these tools, should go through that workshop and learn the tool. It's like anything else in your organization. What works that you don't let anyone know about? Nothing. If you let everyone know about it and teach them and show them how to use it, then there's a higher likelihood of success.
Yeah. Did you get pushback, or have you found that, I don't know, it's kind of common, but the pushback from the staff once this gets introduced in a company, where they're saying, what is this? You're trying to tell me what to do, or, kind of root me out, or, right?
Yeah, there's always, for most people, there's fear of what is this? I don't understand it. Most Culture Index adoptions include a rollout. So we try to demystify the tool, take your entire team through. This is just an understanding of your personality, that it's concrete data, that there shouldn't be used as a weapon, shouldn't be used as an excuse, and that we just help the organization understand. It just points to what most of us already know about the people in the organization, and how to then motivate, give feedback according to those personality traits. So there's not I understand the fear for most organizations, but it confirms what we already know is probably the right way to think about it, and gives us data. And then that data is available for us to go, well, how do I hire using this data moving forward? How do I motivate and inspire and give feedback to my existing team? And how do I get the most from everybody? And, the tool helps that. And I think the organizations that understand that and use it and are sticklers on, do I have right people, right seat? Much like we do in the Pinnacle work, we look at talent assessment and go, hey, what's the performance and culture fit? This is another component of, well, are they hardwired to do this work? And you can add that to talent assessment. Many of my clients do that. They're able to look and say, well, how does this person perform? What's their culture fit? And how well do they match the job that we've assigned them to? So, there's a potential third component, which is, are we asking them to modify behavior and stretch? And how hard are we asking them to do that? In Culture Index, we talk about that requires energy to be that intentional and change our behavior. And most of us, when no one's watching or there's an inordinate amount of stress, go back to our base level pattern. So,
how does Culture Index compare to some of the other kind of well-known ones? And the ones that I know, I know more probably about StrengthsFinder than any of the other ones personally, but, DISC, Colby, Myers-Briggs, I suppose that's a really different one. Of course, Enneagram's really different, but just how do they all compare?
Yeah, at the core, they're really not that different. If you look at the history of personality assessments, all the way back to Marston, turn of the century, early 1900s, that we're measuring kind of personality traits. If you look at all these, they're actually fairly similar, and then it becomes, well, two things, which is how strong statistically is the data. Culture Index has a big hand up there. If you look across all the assessments in the market, it's the best statistical significance I've seen against any of those assessments. There may be some new ones that have better, but if you look at that statistical significance, you're going to see that strong. The other is ease of use and the business model. So, and then the third thing is who's helping you. So, like anything,
yeah, sure.
Hey, there's this awesome data. So it becomes, first and foremost, it's grounded, and most of these assessments measure similar things. It's then, well, how strong statistically is it? How easy is it to administer? What's the business model? So many assessments you'll find are pay per assessment. We're unlimited use, essentially assess everyone. So every time you post a job ad, click here to apply, we should get a culture index and build a database, which is really powerful. You can then go back in that database at any point and go, hey, I'm looking for someone that can do this, square peg, square hole, and pull all the square pegs out of the database. And then lastly is who's the person you're dealing with? How well do they understand it? And we spend a lot of time and pride ourselves in mobilizing the data to move your business forward. So it's not just a cool, gee whiz, this is awesome data. It's how to use that data to drive your business forward. So
one of the things I see, I'm sure you see this too, is a visionary entrepreneur gets a hold of some new tool and they start flinging this thing all around the business. And then a month or two later, they've kind of moved on to some other shiny object, squirrel, book of the month, etc. So how do you see, and whether it's this assessment or others, what are some common factors what are some keys, I guess, to kind of get over that first hump of neat tool to, all right, now let's actually make it valuable for us?
So I'll talk about my own experience as a customer. So my first year, cool data, this is awesome, gee whiz, kind of crystal ball, kind of we'll call it parlor trick is kind of how you looked at it and said, hey, this is a little spooky. How does it do this? Second year renewal, a little more scrutiny on how we use it, but I renewed the third year and I turned to my head of sales ops and said, do the super big deep dive into data and come back and show me what the tool can help us do and should help us do moving forward. And super enlightening. And so I push clients all the time to do this, which is how do you start to match the data? How do I use the data? How do I understand what it means? And what we found is we were primarily using it for sales reps. And at the time that we did this evaluation, we had over 150 sales reps in diabetes. We had about 100 in wound care and about 30 in ostomy / colostomy. And we looked across all of them and said, hey, if we look at ideal pattern performance versus non-ideal pattern performance, what do we see? And what we saw is 3-to-1 performance to quota. We saw 4-to-1 0 to 6 month ramp. So 4 times more likely to be at quota at 6 months. And most of that holds true for my clients when they go back and look at that data. And it literally just becomes Moneyball. I mean, this becomes what is our on-base plus slugging metric in Moneyball?
Yeah.
And you can look at that across any job. You can look at that for a warehouse worker. It does not matter. And if you can measure performance, you can then start to track and go, what does it mean by profile type? And what that meant for me is after that point moving forward, if you wanted to hire a sales rep and they didn't have one of these 2 patterns, you needed my approval. So if you came to me and said, hey, we're getting ready to hire Tim in Tennessee, I would go, well, what's Tim's pattern? And if it wasn't Persuader or Trailblazer, I would say no. Or I would say, have you interviewed all your Trailblazers in the database in Tennessee? No. Please go interview those people first. And they would say, oh, yeah. And then I'd go through and say, great, I can pull up the database. Here are the 14 Trailblazers and 8 Persuaders. You've interviewed these 22 people. No. And the answer for Tim in Tennessee is no. And so it's the willingness for someone in your organization to hold people accountable to, we have this data, should we use it?
Yeah. Isn't that a big...
Again, it's we have a financial report at the end of the month that we look at it. And, there are entrepreneurs and organizations that ignore that, and there are entrepreneurs and organizations that look at it and pour over it. So like everything, there's some discipline, intentionality. How well do we understand it? Are we using it? And that, it helps us. I frame, it doesn't make any decisions for us. It gives us the questions to ask, and the tool begs you to ask them. So it's up to the organization to actually ask them.
Yeah. And that seems to be the rub, where having somebody who's willing to follow a process, somebody who's willing to execute around, hey, we figured this out 14 different times and it comes out the same way. Did you do it the way we figured out? No, I didn't. Or even having that conversation around, hey, don't we have a process for that?
Yeah, I mean, and we talk about this in Pinnacle all the time. The head of the organization, entrepreneurial, visionary leader, often is a nonconformist. It is often a all gas, no brake. That is my pattern. I am all gas, no brake. And it quickly becomes, and where the tool helped me most is, I need people on my team that complement that will put the process in place, that will drive that. Even to the point that others in the organization are going, hey, this person who's high conformity is driving me crazy. And I go, yeah, they should. That's what I'm paying them to do for me. And, they'll use derogatory terms for females and, this guy's a hard ass. And I'm like, yeah, they're doing exactly what I want them to do. And it's the willingness of the visionary, second command leaders in the organization to go, yeah, we're going to use this. We have this data. We're paying for this data. It's meaningful. And at the same way, when you say, hey, waiving it, you'll have some people like, well, we can't ever hire that pattern. And again, it's data, and we have to ask the question. So it doesn't, this takes us to AI and everything. It doesn't answer the question for us. It gives us more information. It asks us to ask other questions. And at the end, we, the leaders of an organization, need to make sound decisions based on that data.
What was your journey like with kind of second command, talking about all gas, no brakes? So you have to, the visionary leader has to have the wisdom and foresight to hire brakes and respect the brakes, so what did it look like for you? Were you successful in hiring?
Yeah, very. And Culture Index was a big part of that. So I knew I needed, and it's the same for my admin support today. It was for my second command. It was for who's my sales operations person. I talk about what I loved most in Culture Index is a pattern called specialist. And specialist, in the way I talk about them, are guilt-ridden workers. They don't stop working until it's done. They don't stop working until it's perfect. That drives something that feels like rigidity, inflexibility, an unwillingness to bend, and at times drives you crazy, but you're also then knowing that they're working until it's done and done perfectly. And, that's hard for me that says, hey, let's take the plane off. Let's grab all the seats. Let's put them in the plane and we can put them in while we're up in the air. And the specialist says that's a safety violation and we can't do that. And you have to compromise and figure out that metaphorically. But the tool helps you do that. And for me, everywhere I went, I said, I need a couple things. And my second command is a pattern called Architect. It's high autonomy, also high conformity. So it has more gas, which is more autonomy than brake. But so in kind of common language, they can keep up with me strategically. They can understand where we're going. I don't have to give specific guidance and direction of where we're headed. As soon as they hear it, they go, got it, boss, and they're implementing. And they're putting process and rigor and detail, and much like the name indicates, they can help dream it, and they can put it on paper. They can pave roads and put up street signs. And the rest of the visionary patterns can't do that. They can see the path forward. They have no strength on putting up street signs or paving roads. It's like, hey, just kind of follow me.
Yeah. So the architect, if I understand you right, they're able to dive into the dreaming process a little bit and kind of go, okay, I'm seeing what you're dreaming here. I'm dreaming with you, maybe, but then I'm able to take that dream without any measurements, without any blueprint, and say, okay, this is what this dream would look like if we actually did it.
Yeah, they answer the questions like, hey, we got to build this bridge. Here's the dream. And they have to go, well, how do you actually build it? And is it possible?
And they
so there are bridges that we
out.
could all look at and go, that's an awesome looking bridge, but will it support semi-trucks going across it? No. And an architect is a high detail against the norm, more autonomy, so more dream, but how do we actually do it? And it's grounded, which adds kind of that brake pedal or risk pattern that says, hey, I want to take less risk naturally than the typical visionary. And what that really boils down to is, hey, we thought about this. What are the things we would actually need to do? What could go wrong? Some of the stuff that we talked about before we got on the podcast. What are all the ideas that could go wrong here? And most visionaries go, press forward. And, they learn from it and they make a mistake and go, hey. And even, many visionaries will repeat the same kind of mistakes over and over again. And so you want patterns around you that will at least cause you to pause, that you'll trust, and that have more detail or are complementary. And so tool really will help you with team design. We have an org chart tool inside there. You can build your org charts, look at it, say what pattern should this be if it's an open position, and start to understand, what will complement me, what will complement leader, what will complement the rest of the team. And so, there's a deep dive into this that organizations can truly understand. But, if we look at all the way back to EOS traction, rocket fuel, how do we combine visionary, integrator, all that, there's a bunch of power in the tool to help with that. And then, same across any team.
Sounds like the architect is kind of rare. Is that fair to say? Somebody who's got execution abilities, like able to write this thing out and then go do it. Like actually not just write it down on paper, but actually project manage the thing, talking about the bridge. Yeah.
So, if you look at every pattern, so I'll frame it this way. Every pattern, every dot position has both strength and weakness. So, architects, tech experts are the best workers on the planet. What I mean by that is they are independent, self-directed, able to solve problems, able to press forward, aggressively pursue results. They are introspective, meaning they think well. They solve problems almost instantly. They are impatient, and they are conforming. So how well do they do work? Near perfect. How well do they solve problems? Near perfectly. How well do they press forward? Awesomely. They are, because most are left side social, they are not as inspirational as other patterns. They're a little more, it's your job, damn it, do it. But it brings tremendous value. And the downside of that pattern are twofold, that they're not the most inspirational and that they also think everyone else is capable of doing what they do.
Yeah.
And what you learn as you mature and get the wisdom in at least most entrepreneurs is that, the reason I'm here is because I'm different. And The reason they're there is because they're different. And so you hit the nail on the head. It's a difficult pattern to find, valuable when you find them, and it has both strength and weakness. And the way I frame it is, so does every other pattern. So you even talk about it in some context that every profile has value and every profile has tax. And what you want to understand is, well, how much tax do I have to pay for the value of this profile? And for some profiles, the tax outweighs the value.
That's a really interesting way to look at that. I was just, because I just finished this book by Thomas Sowell, I was watching various clips, and I've seen a bunch of clips of him from decades and decades in the past. He's been around since the early 70s at least, debating and leading things, well, leading ideas and so forth. And he was a student of Milton Friedman, and he was involved with the Hoover Institute, which Milton Friedman was involved in at Stanford. I think Thomas Sowell is still at Stanford. He's been there for decades. But one of the things he said, or it was either him or Milton Friedman, I was watching a bunch of stuff the other day because of this little rabbit trail. He said there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And so, because someone would say, well, we got to solve this blah, blah, blah education thing. Well, and we need a solution. Well, there aren't any solutions. They're just trade-offs. When you do this thing, it's good at this, but it's going to cost here. There's, pros and cons to both sides of all of these things. And these tools are also, there are trade-offs, So if you're going to get person that fits this profile to sit in this seat, you darn well better have a balancing act on the other side of the pendulum, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You can just look at the first trait, autonomy, and go, hey, what does high autonomy bring? Well, it brings lead, direct, drive results, pushy, autonomous, solve problems. I mean, all these positive things. What else does it bring? Stubborn, arrogant, hard-headed. Do I listen well to others?
Yeah.
So it brings all of that tax, and you have to look at the other traits and go, what am I looking for? Mm-hmm. And does this solve my problem? And you go, yeah, partly, but there's going to be tax.
Yeah.
And
that's a great way to put it, the tax, as far as that's the trade-off. You got to pay, you got to pony up. There's some table stakes to this thing.
And that's informed my thinking about people for a long time, including, the people that are most important in my life, that there'll be value to me. And there'll be tax. And that, when we look at emotion or other things, or how people handle stress or how we react situationally, we'll look and go, man, I value that. And there will be other parts of the things that we value that will come with an associated tax. And so, if we look at, we'll just call range of emotion one of those. We'll see people that are super delighted when things happen. Well, what happens when things go wrong? They're going to be super bummed. People that are more flatline will be more flatline. And, we have to relish the highs and lows then of those people that have that range of emotion, because we're going to really enjoy the high. And so, it just informs our thinking that every person brings this kind of unique strength, weakness, value, and tax. I like value and tax because you look and go, it's not potentially a weakness. And, many of my thoughts about personality even become, we have heroic traits and anti-heroic traits. Mm-hmm. And, these anti-heroic traits actually have a hero component, but many will look at them as villainous. Many will look at my non-conformity as sloppy, rebellious, careless. And you could say that, or you could go, there's no boundary. There's no, how do we think about what we've done in the past? There's not worry about it going wrong. So there's these anti-heroic components of personality that I think are super intriguing, and that come with a tax, but come with value at the same time. So.
Yeah. What about character in all these? This is something I was thinking about the other day, because we talked with Kimberly Dyer about Colby. We had Alec Broadfoot on here, and they have an assessment they use over at Vision Spark, the Achiever profile, I think it's called, and of course, knowing a good bit about StrengthsFinder and so forth, it seems to me that none of these things, at least on the surface, talk about character. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think same with culture index. I think it's so hard to measure that and look and go, well, how do we measure it? What are the components? So we just talk about it in culture indexes. We're not assessing morality. We're not assessing this character piece other than what are the traits and what's predictive of behavior.
Yeah.
So we talk about that it is predictive of behavior. We'll be able to talk about what that looks like. But in terms of honesty, integrity, other things, that's a little more difficult.
Yeah.
Is probably the short answer. Are there other things that we can look at the tool and start to understand and infer? Sure. But to go, hey, this person is trustworthy, honest, is not going to show up in the tool.
Yeah. One of the ways I explain StrengthsFinder is Hitler operated from his strengths. He did a bunch of dastardly stuff, but he didn't operate outside of his abilities. He operated within his abilities.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably.
Well, and I think, this is a big Vistage learning that what occurs, we assign meaning to. So in no way advocating anything Hitler did, but you look at the strength of people and weakness, and there's both strength and weakness there. And, same thing, we could look and say, hey, and is there a moral compass? Is there an evilness? Yes. Can we infer that from a culture index profile? Well, we can infer it in an indifference to people. We can infer it in a real liking of people. And both of those come again with value and tax. So, we start to look at the interrelationship of traits. I talk about all the time, does this person care more about results or relationships? And we can tell that from the profile. And so, if you have a job that requires more focus on results, then you know what pattern to hire. If you have one that leans more about relationships, you know what pattern to hire. We also talk about, are these offensive profiles or defensive profiles? We're quick to talk about, well, can defense score touchdowns? Yes. But is it their job? So, often people will look and go, well, I want my defense to score a bunch of points. You're like, well, that's not what this is for. So that's a defensive pattern. What should they do? They're going to tap the brakes and do it perfectly. Yeah. Are they going to lock down that corner? Yes. Are they going to score a bunch of touchdowns? Unlikely.
Yeah, they're just lucky. It's
and then nice we go the opposite and go sales rep. Are they going to score a bunch of touchdowns? Yes. Is there going to be chaos everywhere this pattern goes? Yes. Mm-hmm. So we can just start to understand that predictively and again go value tax. So the moral thing's hard. There are patterns, high conformity, that become moralistic, that become this is right and wrong, and I push, and that's more problematic. You can imagine those people that are high rule follower become this is the moral standard of doing it the right way, and you'll hear them say things like there's a right way and a wrong way, and I choose to do it the right way. That's a moralistic view of the world, and inferring that people that are, again, if we go back to that offense-defense model, that are offensive and scoring touchdowns are immoral. We're like, no, they're just pressing forward and getting us results, and they're not focused on details or process.
So, with culture, and that was all super fascinating. I'm mystified at how, I don't know, how seldom visionaries, entrepreneurs, etc., employ these tools that are so rich and so capable of helping them. And I wonder, from your vantage point, why do they hesitate to do this? Because they're so prevalent. There's a lot of great tools.
Yeah, I think all kinds of things, Mark. I think if you look at this from a high-level perspective, many think it's voodoo. Many think, hey, this is bunk. And that they also want to see perfect. And so the way I always frame it is that this is statistically strong, not perfect. That you will hire, and we'll use Trailblazer as an example, as sales reps, and that's one of the ideal patterns. If we look at Trailblazer, it's high autonomy, high social ability. So can they influence and persuade? Yes. Can they drive results? Yes. Can they build relationships? Yes. Are they impatient? Yes. Do they have enough conformity to follow our rules, like do call reporting, to fill out CRM, to do, yes. Now, does that mean 100 out of 100 Trailblazers will find success over quota? No, we're dealing with humans. But like Moneyball, it's 85 to 90% of those will. And on the flip side, we'll look at other patterns and go, I'm going to hire a craftsman as a sales rep, which is a steady, methodical, measure twice, cut once, very deliberate, think CPA, and go, do I want my CPA selling for me? No. Do I want my sales reps doing taxes for me? No.
Right.
And so I think we get caught up in that this should do the magic trick for me of being perfect, and instead it's just a data point. It helps us confirm, ask the questions, dive right into reference checking, which is a lost art today.
Yeah, roger that.
I think reference checking becomes, hey, we call the people on their reference list. We call into HR, and HR says, I only can confirm employment. And, I follow and ascribe to WHO, which says do threat of reference check. And when we do reference check, actually do it. And the way I do that is we're interviewing people, and I go, Mark, who are the last 3 people that you worked for? What's their first name, last name? If they were here today, what would they say they admire and caution about you? Great. If we move forward, I'm going to talk to them. And then when we move forward, I go, Mark, you need to call these 3 people and get them on my calendar so I can talk to them.
Yeah. I get so much pushback from that. And I'm laughing because you said threat of reference check. When I help my clients build a interviewing process or a onboard recruiting process, we call it recruiting flywheel. I use that in there, and it's from top grading, from who, et cetera.
Father-son team.
Really
good stuff.
What's Jeff Smart? Brad Smart was the dad, right?
Yep.
From top grading. Did you ever read that, top grading? What a huge, it's like a tome. I mean, the thing was like 900 pages of just drudgery.
I always joke it's a calculus book, and if you want like the calculus for dummies, get his son's book, Who. It's a lot easier to read and digest and go through the same thing. So, we train folks on how to do that. We train them on, hey, I have this data. It says this person, again, and I'll use me as an example. And I use Jeff Ward as one of my references for who was my culture index advisor for many, many years. And I used him to say, hey, I'm looking for my next CEO gig. You should talk to him because he has a great understanding of who I am and who I'm not. And so, he knew if you're looking for somebody to grow the company by 3% and put rigorous process and squeeze out the last little bit of margin, you got the wrong guy. If you want a guy who's going to challenge what you're doing every day and try to double the size of your business in a year, you got the right guy. And both of those come with good and bad. And my good is good and my bad is bad. And, if you were interviewing me, you would want to say, well, Dave, this says you're in the bottom 2% of all people from Conformity. How does that show up? Well, it shows up from the time that I was a young kid. I wanted to do the opposite of what my parents wanted me to do. When, I chose college, I chose the one that was furthest away. There's a bunch in my psyche that says, well, that's who I am. And that brings, again, strength and weakness. And you can ask me about it. And what you're going to hear is I hire people to do that. If you expect me to do that, you shouldn't hire me.
Yeah.
Will I have people that will keep us inside the bumpers in bumper bowling? Yes. I'll put those people in place. I'll make sure we have the system and rigor. I don't want to break the law. But I will ask my head of compliance and lawyer all the time. They'll go, can't do that. And I say, can't do that. Why? And what they're almost always saying is because there's too much risk.
Right.
And then I would turn to them and go, well, that's your job. Help me minimize the risk. What do we need to do? It's a business decision, not a legal decision.
Right.
So, there's a bunch of this data that can help us and help understand people. And reference checking is just one of those ways. Succession planning is another. Motivating, giving feedback is the third. I mean, the list goes on and on and on how we can use this data.
Do you have any good resources around the hiring process? I know who is great for who. As far as who goes, I've had to kind of like warp it a little bit for because he's talking about these kind of Fortune 500 CEOs and showing how they do some of this recruiting. But any kind of practical books out there that could be like a one and done? Hey, you big dummy, get better at recruiting. Here's a.
I still think who's the best, and then I use a metaphor that I talk about everywhere I go, which is, could you find a better first baseman? And so, I apologize for anyone that doesn't follow baseball or thinks that the stereotypical men's sports, but that's the metaphor I use all the time. And if you keep that top of mind and go, could I find a better first baseman? It requires this that I'm recruiting all the time. If I'm managing a minor league baseball team or a major league baseball team, I'm always looking for, is there a better first baseman? And the way I also talk about it is metaphorically, it matches the maturity of our organization. So I've coached T-ball. And if you coach T-ball and go, could I find a better first baseman? It's almost a joke. I mean, I look and go, we got to win in T-ball if I go, Timmy, you're playing first base, and he runs toward first base. I mean, that's our expectation of first base in T-ball. Now, if he can catch, it's a bonus.
Right.
Your best player's playing like all infield, shortstop, roamer, and he's going after every ground ball and whipping it toward the first baseman. And most times you just kind of turn your head and go, oh my God, I hope no one gets hurt in this play. But as we move toward Little League and high school, you expect your first baseman to catch everything in the zone. And as we mature and go up, I expect him to dig balls out of the dirt. I expect him to save us 40 errors a year. As we get to minor league, major league, I also expect them to hit near 300 and 40 to 80 RBIs a year. And so it's a heavy task. And I'm reminded of this. We went a couple of years ago to the Dodgers when they were playing in the World Series, and they had Pujols at the end of his career. And the fans in L.A. are going, hey, you fat slob, and they're screaming to him. And I'm like, yeah, that's because he's not now the best first baseman in baseball that he was for 15 years in a row.
Right.
And so, could you find a better first baseman than Pujols today or 2 years ago? Yeah. 10 years ago, no. And so I think that's kind of the way I've thought about talent, is that we just got to always be looking and saying, hey, that is the recipe to success.
Yeah.
And that there's no substitute for that. If you look across any organization, my own journey in running companies, it's, man, the better team I have, the better the results. The better the culture, the better the results. And so it is, can we get the right people in the right seats? Can we get them to act and behave? We want them to act and behave. All the work we do in Pinnacle points to that. It's, do we really mean it? Do we care about it? Are we deliberate about hiring? And are we always evaluating, giving people feedback to go, how do you get better? And most don't. So it's a long-winded answer. I don't think
I love it.
I don't think there's a cheat sheet for that. I think Who talks about how to find them.
Yeah.
And then, there's books like The Advantage that talk about how to get the most from them.
Yeah.
That's probably a great reference on, hey, if you want more from a team and you want people engaged, lifting, doing the heavy work, that our people and our culture are our competitive advantage.
I like The Ideal Team Player by Lencioni.
Same. Advantage was a precursor to that, just saying, here's the...
Yeah, I think The Advantage is a great book. I've had a number of my clients, before they started working with me or as they started working, read The Advantage to give them, just to get them to kind of go, oh, this is what a holistic view of what an organization needs to nail, kind of the invisible stuff.
Yeah, all the culture stuff, which is... I talked about it in my own organizations, that we have core values and they're alive and well, and that, when I hired, I talked about them and said, hey, this is like Sesame Street. And what I meant by that is one of us is not like the other. And if you're that person, you won't be here. You won't be on Sesame Street. And so this is what we care about. This is how we actually act and behave. And, one of mine was, we're all willing to sweep floors. It was an early entrepreneurial company I had, and one of our core values. And what I meant by that is, we'll all chip in, we'll do whatever. And I would take it a step further, and I would go, Mark, if I'm hiring you today, and one of our core values is we're all willing to sweep floors, and the first time I assign work and you think it's beneath you, and you kind of roll your eyes, I'm going to caution you. Second time, I'm going to say, if that ever happens again, you won't be here. Third time it happens, I ask you to leave and go, this is what we mean by that here, that we all are willing to do that without regard to our position, to our ego, we all want to win. And so we're willing to do about anything it is. And you see great organizations that do that every day, and you have other people that go, yeah, it's not my thing, I'm not going to do it. I'm like, great, go somewhere else. And so I think that's the other side, is that most entrepreneurs get that, understand it. They're just not willing to make the tough decisions or hold people accountable for that fluctuation or variation from our core values. And, I framed it, you have to be able to exist in our clubhouse. You got to meet the minimum standards. And if you just meet the minimum standards, you better be batting, 325 and hitting a bunch of home runs. And that if you're all-star but asshole, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Yeah.
And we want that, but we don't want it at the cost of culture. So you got to meet the minimum bar.
This concludes part 1 of our interview with Dave Quick. Please join us in episode 047 for part 2. Thanks for watching and listening to the Business Broken to Smokin' podcast, and make sure to click subscribe.